If you've watched the previous episode of the thrilling wrongful imprisonment story, you should remember Hoover well. He was a ruthless person who would do anything to achieve his goals. During his 37-year tenure as FBI director, he abused his power and committed countless wrongdoings. Just think about how much damage Hoover alone could cause. And add to that the McCarthyism of shooting at shadows. It's like an atomic bomb level of destruction. Today, let me share with you the tragic story of the FBI's atomic bomb spy case. Let's first take a ride on a time machine back to the Cold War era. At that time, Americans were generally anxious about the tense situation of the Cold War and even swept up in a Red Scare. As a result, those who actively opposed communism were easily seen as heroes in the public eye. Even the cool-headed President Truman couldn't resist the nationwide fervor against communism. Hoover quickly gained fame in this situation and not only gained the high trust of the people, but also received the Congress's unrestricted praise. Before other senior officials even discovered the existence of communism, Hoover had already recognized its harm, and the public should strongly support Hoover and the Bureau. The glory-seeking Hoover took advantage of his high prestige and decided to launch a case of the century, which was the atomic bomb leak case. At that time, the successful nuclear test by the Soviet Union shocked and greatly impacted the United States, suspecting that the Soviet Union had stolen the technology to manufacture atomic bombs from the United States. Just at that time, the UK arrested the spy of the century Fuchs, and everyone learned that this German communist who worked for both the UK and the US had been providing key intelligence for Soviet atomic bomb research and development for many years. Internal traitors are hard to prevent, and the FBI immediately began a massive investigation of Soviet spies within the US. Soon, a mechanic named Greenglass was caught. This New Yorker was drafted into the US Army after World War II and was chosen as a member of the Manhattan Project because of his expertise in mechanics. After the FBI arrested him, they interrogated him intensely, pressuring him to explain why he became a spy. Greenglass gave this answer: "The Soviet Union is an ally of the United States, but the US did not share information about making weapons with the Soviet Union, which is unreasonable." The FBI leaked Greenglass's confession to the New York Times in order to stir up emotions. Greenglass did have a preference for communism. He admitted to providing information related to the atomic bomb to the Communist Party since 1945. In fact, there was no concept of secrecy or espionage prevention in that era. Even though the Manhattan Project was so important, many confidential messages were simply left on the table, and any member could easily read them. Greenglass often copied down this information by hand, and with his mechanical talent, cracking safe codes was not difficult, and some relevant intelligence was shared by him. At that time, the United States was a period of terror that encouraged friends and family to report on each other. Anyone who had participated in a union, strike, demonstration, parade, or book club could be questioned. Therefore, for the FBI, Greenglass was a useful lead, and catching him meant they could get more people. They continued to question him about who the mastermind behind the scenes was, and Greenglass had to confess that it was his brother-in-law, Rosenberg. When the FBI stormed into the Rosenbergs' home to arrest them, the couple and their 2 young sons were listening to a radio program. Amidst the chaos, Mr. Rosenberg was taken away while his wife could only scream, "I want a lawyer!" The frightened children had no idea what was happening. In their eyes, their father was a very gentle and kind person who always wore a smile on his face and took them to the park on weekends to feed squirrels. However, for the FBI, Rosenberg had a completely different image. The files recorded him as a deceitful engineer and an active member of the underground Communist Party. The FBI repeatedly emphasized Rosenberg's identity as a leader of the Young Communist League USA and threatened him, saying that they had ample evidence to prove that he had established a Soviet spy network in the United States. If he refused to cooperate and give up other members, his wife would also face imprisonment. It was really outrageous. Mrs. Rosenberg was just a simple singer and a secretary for a shipping company. How could she be involved in such a complicated spy case? As it turns out, in the politically charged atmosphere of the witch hunt at that time, the dirty tactics commonly used by the FBI in investigating spy cases were to use torture against the accused or intentionally arrest their family and friends. If the accused compromised and provided the FBI with a list out of fear, they could receive reduced sentences. Mrs. Rosenberg was a typical victim of this surveillance strategy. Since Mr. Rosenberg refused to reveal any communist allies, the FBI continued to harass Mrs. Rosenberg's brother, mentioned earlier as Greenglass. The FBI asked him, "Didn't you say that there was a woman responsible for typing the atomic bomb-related information every time you went to your brother-in-law's house? Who is this person?" Greenglass recalled the scene where he often brought his wife to his brother-in-law's house and was plunged into great agony. One was his wife, the other was his sister. Whom should he sacrifice? He also thought of his young children and didn't want them to be motherless, so he reluctantly told the investigators that it was his sister who typed the information. The FBI did not intend to let go and further threatened Greenglass with the death penalty to force him to reveal more details. So he had to fabricate more lies, saying that Mrs. Rosenberg printed the atomic secrets and gave them to other spies in New York City. With the new testimony, the FBI immediately arrested Mrs. Rosenberg and, of course, used her to intimidate Mr. Rosenberg. To the surprise of the judicial authorities, Mr. Rosenberg still kept silent and emphasized that he was protected by the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, meaning that the government violated the principle of presumption of innocence. He also felt that there was no need to explain his communist experience. Mrs. Rosenberg's thoughts were almost identical to her husband's. She believed in her innocence and felt that there was not much to explain. The prosecution unit, wearing colored glasses of course, accused the Rosenberg couple of espionage. What followed was an unfair trial. The so-called evidence came only from Mrs. Rosenberg's brother, Greenglass, but we all know that he was forced to perjure himself and become an FBI accomplice under threat. Ironically, the prosecution unit and the FBI struggled to pin the spy charge on the Rosenberg couple. But the spy charge carried the death penalty, which made Director Hoover hesitate. First, accusing a young couple of being spies and then sentencing them to death. Can this extreme method convince the general public? Secondly, if the Rosenberg couple's children become orphans because of this, the social perception will definitely be very bad. However, by the time Hoover realized the severity of the situation, it was completely out of control. Due to the media's active reporting, the whole country was discussing this case. The photos of the Rosenbergs holding hands and kissing through the bars of a prison car, which were put on the front page of newspapers, shocked many people, and it can be imagined that many sympathized with the Rosenbergs. The contradiction is that if the matter becomes too big, the punishment will be reduced, which would mean telling other suspects that the FBI's crackdown is just for show. In order to maintain his image, Hoover privately begged Judge Kaufman, who was in charge of the case, to take the big picture into account and scare the Rosenbergs as long as the goal was achieved. Unexpectedly, Judge Kaufman was a fanatical anti-communist arranged by the staff of Congressman McCarthy. He even believed that the Rosenbergs must be held accountable for the casualties in the Korean War and was determined to send them to the electric chair. Even though Hoover repeatedly emphasized that depriving a young child of their mother's life would lose the public's support, the judge remained unmoved. In court, the judge read the verdict sternly. "For your betrayal and evil conspiracy against the country, I must make the following sentence: Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, death penalty." Before being sent to prison, Mr. Rosenberg shouted to his beloved wife, "Everything will be okay, don't be afraid." Mrs. Rosenberg, trembling all over, responded to her husband by singing the aria from the opera Madame a Butterfly, "We will meet in better days." The jailers and other prisoners were moved to tears. When the children, who were about to become orphans, visited their parents in prison, they asked the guard to watch the electric chair, which broke everyone's heart. The news continued to report on the Rosenbergs and their two innocent children, and the scenes of their loving family left a deep impression on people. At the same time, Hoover declared that he would continue to hunt down over 10,000 American citizens suspected of being spies, shocking the entire society. Finally, the people awakened and began to realize the doubts surrounding the actions of the FBI. It seemed that as long as someone was labeled a Communist Party spy, their life could be destroyed without reliable evidence. The wave of questioning grew stronger and spread throughout the country, even reaching other parts of the world. Prominent figures from various fields came forward to support the Rosenberg couple, including the French president, Picasso, and Sartre. Even the Pope directly appealed to the US president, but unfortunately, all appeals failed to sway the judge's decision. Then, the presiding judge in the case, Judge Kaufman, received a weighty letter. The letter was from none other than Einstein himself. Einstein had secretly written to the judge, fearing that speaking publicly as a public figure would cause unnecessary trouble and leave no room for the case to be resolved. In the letter, he reminded the judge that, based on what is known, the defendants were just insignificant players. Why should they be punished so harshly? As an American citizen, he earnestly requested that the judge use the power granted by the law to handle the matter justly, without any regrets. To everyone's surprise, Judge Kaufman, who had lost his judgment due to anti-communist hysteria, handed the secret letter directly to Hoover. Instead of continuing to persuade the judge to change his mind, Hoover became fixated on Einstein and launched a massive investigation intending to label him as a fellow traveler of the Soviet Communist Party. During that period, Einstein was harassed by various forces, including the FBI, the media, and irrational American people who insulted him with offensive language. However, he remained steadfast and refused to yield, even mentally prepared to go to jail to defend the democratic system. After waiting for the judge's response for a while, Einstein could no longer bear it and publicly published a letter expressing his personal conscience, emphasizing that even if the Rosenberg couple had acted improperly, they should not have been sentenced to death. He urged President Eisenhower to pardon them. Before the execution, support for the Rosenberg couple continued to grow, with their names appearing on large billboards in major cities such as Toronto, Rome, Paris, London, Prague, Warsaw, Moscow, and Tel Aviv. Demonstrations supporting the Rosenberg couple were held in various cities, and on the day before the execution, over 5,000 people participated in a protest march in the United States, shouting loudly and demanding that the Supreme Court reconsider. However, despite everyone's efforts, their endeavors ultimately went in vain. On June 19, 1953, the Rosenbergs were executed in the electric chair, ending their short 30-something years of life. Mrs. Rosenberg's brother, Greenglass, was imprisoned and served time. After being released in 1960, he changed his name and lived a low-key life. It wasn't until 2001 that he publicly admitted that he had falsely accused his sister to save himself and protect his wife and children. However, he emphasized that he did not regret his decision and that if the same thing happened again, he would still prioritize his wife and children. In 1995, the U.S. National Security Agency released the Venona Project documents, which aimed to decrypt secret messages from Soviet intelligence agencies. One telegram from New York to Moscow in 1944 showed that Mr. Rosenberg was involved in espionage. But the information he provided was not highly significant. Mrs. Rosenberg had nothing to do with espionage. Recent academic research has shown that the Rosenbergs had only basic knowledge of nuclear weapons, and the information the Soviet Union needed for its nuclear development was actually obtained from other sources. However, the truth will not bring back the 2 lives lost. And human rights do not just fall from the sky. We must always be vigilant and work tirelessly to fight for them. Do you remember the Rosenbergs' 2 sons? After their parents were executed in the dangerous environment of the Red Scare, no relatives dared to take them in. At that time, a brave Jewish high school teacher stepped forward to adopt these 2 orphans, and he was the famous Louis Allen. He had been brave before. In 1939, he wrote a song called Strange Fruit about the rights of African Americans and dedicated it to the famous jazz singer Billie Holiday. This tearful and sad song comforted the hearts of countless black people, but also drew the attention of the FBI. But that's another story. Please pick up your phone and scan the QR code on the screen. Let's listen to the century song Strange Fruit by Billie Holiday, which she sang with her life. Next time we will share with you the hidden tears behind this song and see how African Americans struggled for basic rights. Don't miss this exciting story. See you next time. If you want to catch more kick-ass stories, don't forget to hit that subscribe button with the little bell icon. That way, you won't miss out on any of the good stuff. See you soon.